Okay, folks, so we're going to look at a couple more of these. We'll do 5, 6, and 7, and then we'll stop. You've learned different factor techniques. Okay, so as you go through this process, you need to kind of ask yourself, what's the best way to factor? For number 5, first we want to set this equal to 0. I can either move the 9s squared by subtracting it, or I can move the 16 by subtracting it. I like to keep my quadratic term with a positive coefficient. I'm going to go minus 16. So we get 0 equals 9s squared minus 16. Now you notice the middle term is missing. So what we can do with that, if you want to group, you can, but this is a difference of two squares. This is 3s times 3s. This is 4 times 4, where one of them is negative. So my factor pattern, I can say 3s plus 4 times 3s minus 4. Now that I have my factors, something times something is equal to 0. So either the first factor is 0 or the second factor is 0. So we go minus 4 and then divide by 3. We get a fraction. We get negative 4/3. And then here we'll go plus 4, divide by 3, and we get positive 4/3. So you can either write this negative 4/3 comma 4/3. Another common way to look at it is you can say plus or minus 4/3. You can write it using one thing. Now just to show you here, 4/3 and negative 4/3 is the answer. If I go back to the original problem, 16 equals 9s squared. If I type 9 and negative 4/3, close parentheses, squared, do I get 16? Check. If I type 9, positive 4/3 squared, do I get 16? Check. Those are the correct solutions. All right, let's take a look at number 6 here. Kind of running out of space. X to the third equals 81x. This is not a quadratic, but it doesn't mean that we can't do it. We still need to set the equation to 0. So I'm going to move the 81x. I'm going to subtract it from both sides. And we get x to the third minus 81x equals 0. When you're factoring, don't forget the first type of factoring to look at is a greatest common factor. Notice that both of these terms have an x. So I'm going to factor an x out. Now if you divide out an x from x to the third, that leaves you x squared. And if you divide an x out of this, you get minus 81 equals 0. Now you have to ask yourself, are we done factoring? If you look at x squared minus 81, hey, that's a difference of two squares. That's x times x, and that's 9 times 9. So I can factor that into two binomials. X plus 9 times x minus 9 is equal to 0. So now you have three factors. This times this times this equals 0. So what we have to do is say, okay, maybe the first one, x, is equal to 0. And that's already solved. That's a solution. Maybe the second factor, x plus 9, is 0. Subtract 9, you get negative 9. Or maybe the third factor, x minus 9, is 0. Go plus 9 on both sides, you get positive 9. And if you look at what we got here, we have three solutions. We had a cubic equation, x to the third. We have three solutions. When you have a quadratic, an x squared or an s squared, you have possibly two solutions. This will come up in a later example, a later lesson. So we have three answers. We have negative 9, we have 0, and we have positive 9. And if you check those in the original equation, again, they're going to work, all three. All right, the last problem here we'll do is a word problem. Jason jumped off of a cliff into the ocean in Acapulco while vacationing with some friends. His height as a function of time t could be modeled by the function h of t, h is height, t is time, equals negative 16t squared plus 16t plus 480. T is the time in seconds. H is the height in feet. Jason hit the water after how many seconds? All right, now on the side here, let's think about this. You got a cliff. There's Jason. Jason's going to dive off the cliff. Okay, here's the water. Now, H represents the height. Okay, so if the time was 0 before he jumps, if I plugged a 0 into the function here, negative 16 times 0 squared is 0. 16 times 0 is 0, plus 480. His height is 480. The question is, let's see, Jason hit the water after how many seconds? So how long does it take for him to be right here? Well, when he hits the water, the height is 0. So this height function, I'm going to rewrite this. I'm going to say negative 16t squared plus 16t plus 480. When is that equal to 0? That's the question. We need to find the value for t that makes that true. So what we have to do is solve it. It's a quadratic equation. It's a t squared. Now, before we start to factor, can we divide something out of all of these? Can we factor out a GCF? And in this case, we can. 16 goes into each one of these values. I'm going to factor out, in this case, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide everything by negative 16. Now, I could have pulled this off on the side as a GCF. Here's what's going to happen. The reason I divided by a negative is I want just a t squared. So t squared, this will be minus 1t. This will be minus 30. And 0 divided by anything is still 0. If you don't want to divide everything, including this right side, by that number, you can factor it out. You end up with the same thing. So if I factored it, this is what I would have. Okay? So if you want to stick with the factor, because that's typically what we've done, I can just keep this outside. Here's the question. Can we factor what's left over? T squared minus t minus 30. That's a quadratic. The lead coefficient is just a 1. It's a 1t squared. So we're thinking what multiplies to 30 and adds up to negative 1. And in this case, it's going to be positive 5, negative 6. Multiplies to negative 30. So positive 5, negative 6, that's our winner. So what we have here, you got negative 16. The two binomials are t plus 5 times t minus 6 is equal to 0. The reason why I don't need the negative 16, technically it's a factor, but if I try to set it equal to 0, we already know that's not true. There's no variable with this factor, so I don't have to solve it. I can just ignore it. So if I just divided everything out, I really didn't need this. So we can just focus on what we have here, the two binomials. Now we have t plus 5 times t minus 6 is 0. That means that one of the factors has to be 0. So maybe it's t plus 5 equals 0, so we'd subtract and we would get negative 5. Or maybe t minus 6 is 0, and you would add 6 to get t is equal to 6. Now here's the thing about a word problem. You have to ask yourself if your answer makes sense. T is the time in seconds. You can't have negative seconds, okay? We're not going back in time. So that doesn't make sense. Even though negative 5 works in the equation, it's not going to make sense as an answer. 6 seconds makes sense. So how long does it take for him to hit the water? 6 seconds. And that is the end of the notes.